This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers and scholars, or simply people of ideas, of all types and vocations, who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guest today is a religion scholar at the University of North Carolina, Pembroke, and the author of a new book entitled Jewish Radical Ultra-Orthodoxy Confronts Modernity, Zionism and Women's Equality. It was recently published in English by Cambridge University Press. The book offers a genealogy of the two most radical examples of Jewish ultra-orthodoxy, Jerusalem's Neturei Karta and Brooklyn's Satmar Hasidim. And it focuses on their respective spiritual leaders, Rabbi Amram Blau and Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum. With me on the line from North Carolina is Professor Moti Inbari. Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, ultra-Orthodoxy, it seems, is more diverse than meets the eye. How are Neturei Karta and Satmar different from other sectors of ultra-Orthodoxy?
Well, in many regards, they are similar. They are part of ultra-Orthodoxy. What identifies Satmar and Neturei Karta especially is their attitude toward Zionism, which is a strong, disagreement and negation of the very concept of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel before the coming of the Messiah. Well, I guess most ultra-Orthodox would to some extent agree with them, but they will not take it to the extent, to the radical conclusions that Satmar and Neturei Karta brought it. So Satmar and Neturei Karta stand like at the far end of the spectrum of ultra-Orthodoxy regarding their attitude toward the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm. But is really the state of Israel what drives them apart? There are no other more, I'd say, substantive differences or disagreements between these groups and the, say, mainstream ultra-Orthodoxy?
Yeah, so mainstream ultra-Orthodoxy is more willing to make compromises, whereas these two movements are much less willing to compromise in the name of purity, in the name of true worship of God. And this reflects the biggest challenge of modernity, which is viewed by ultra-Orthodoxy as something bad and evil, something that is jeopardizing Jewish existence. But whereas the mainstream of ultra-Orthodoxy still see in modernity great dangers, is more willing to adapt and more willing to make compromises. These two movements that I wrote my book on are much less willing to make these compromises in the name of purity, in the name of, zealotry.
Before we move on to focus on these two, because this is, after all, the reason we are here, I'd like you to explain a bit, what are the ways by which ultra-Orthodoxy compromises with modernity? Because at the end of the day, the whole raison d'etre, the reason that ultra-Orthodoxy appeared in the first place was to be some sort of buffer between Judaism and modernity.
Yeah, there are all kinds of examples. For example, education. Opposition to modern education among ultra-Orthodoxy, at least at the beginning when this movement was established, their opposition to education was to modern education, was much more lenient. So in the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, there's questions about allowing children to learn foreign languages and math, and some kind of secular education like history and politics was much more lenient. They understood that they have to do it because modern states demand that their citizens would be educated to some extent. And so they were willing to allow it, for example, women's education. In the Jewish traditional culture, women were not going to school. They were staying at home with their moms. Mm-hmm. And so, but modern states demanded that women would go to study. and to learn at school some basic education. So they were willing to make these compromises.
The same way that ultra-Orthodoxy in Israel makes compromises with the state, I mean, by participating in the democratic process, etc., whereas Neturei Karta live in their own isolated enclave.
Exactly. So you kind of really... So I wanted to give two examples. One was education, the second was politics. Right. So exactly, you brought this example straight away in which, like, say, modern politics is viewed suspiciously in the eyes of ultra-Orthodox Jews. But they understand that without participating in politics, their voices would be left out. Therefore, they decided that even though politics is viewed as something wicked and heretical in their eyes, it's better to be part of it than to boycott it. Mm-hmm. And so mainstream ultra-Orthodoxy joined politics, and not just in Israel, also in Poland and other places, Hungary. They've joined the political process in order to make their voice heard.
Right. And did these two movements, Neturei Karta and Satmar, emerge against this backdrop? Was this already an established sort of attitude towards modern life at the time when Neturei Karta and Satmar saw the light of day in the first half of the 20th century in East Europe?
Yes, Neturei Karta and Satmar basically are continuing a movement that started in the beginning of the 20th century or the late 19th century in Hungary, which I refer to as the radical ultra-Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. And its center was in Hungary in some Hasidic movements, and especially Moncach Hasidic movement. So they are continuing this trend that started, in Hungary. Well, in Hungary, they were very powerful. This movement was very powerful. It had many followers. But, of course, we all know what happened to Hungarian Jews.
So they were powerful up until the Holocaust.
Exactly, up until the Holocaust. And the Neturei Karta and Satmar, and especially Satmar, these are the people who were able to survive the Holocaust and re-emerge again and reinvent themselves in new continents, in new places. So it's mostly true about the Satmar Hasidic movement in New York, which was created by Holocaust survivors that came from Hungary. But also it's true about Jerusalem and the Neturei Karta experience that kind of was able to build up on people who were able to escape Hungary.
Yeah, because the two founding fathers of these movements, Amram Blau and Yoel Teitelbaum, actually originated in that part of Hungary. They were not only spiritually part of this movement, but also quite physically.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And Amram Blau's origin comes from Slovakia, but from areas that were kind of influenced by the Hungarian style of Orthodoxy. And Yoel Teitelbaum is certainly Satmar, even though today Satmar is located in Romania, borders have changed, but it is it's the heart of the Hungarian Orthodox movement.
And still they were the only people who actually replicated that existence, that pre-war existence, to a post-war reality. What is it about them that made them do it?
Well, they were unique. They were, Hasidic Judaism after the Holocaust was severely beaten and it lost its powers. Of course, its masses were in Europe. And many of them went through the Holocaust and didn't survive. So when this greater movement of Hasidic Judaism was reestablishing itself in new conditions, it was much more willing to make compromises that we spoke about earlier, was much more willing to kind of be practical. Whereas these two figures stood at the far end and said, no, we have to remain loyal to the old ways as it used to be before the Holocaust without any compromise whatsoever. And this was their appeal because they were so radical. They were unwilling to make any changes. They were very combative against the state of Israel. So this what made them, so unique and draw people to their communities because they were so radical. Their radicalism was their charm.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, if you look at it, it's the radicalism of the pre-war movement that got completely discredited, not only, in terms of depleted numbers, but also the fact that this way of living was perhaps not suitable for the post-war environment.
Well, 100,000 Satmar Hasidics that are living today in New York would probably disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were able to reinvent this movement again in a new land, under new conditions, but they wouldn't agree that it's unpractical. Of course, they are doing it. Mm-hmm. So it is practical, at least for them.
But still, it was these two individuals that almost single-handedly recreated that long-lost way of living. Tell us a bit about their biography and the way that they rose to prominence. Let's start with Blau.
Okay. So, yes, Blau was a supervisor, yes. This is how he became so popular, because in ultra-Orthodox communities, the way in which they elect their leaders is by their scholarship abilities. Yes, they usually are the great rabbis. And Amram Bloy was not a great rabbi whatsoever. He never published anything significant in halacha or in Jewish law or Hasidic literature or anything of that sort. What made him unique was his ability to establish the modesty patrols. Basically, he created the police force that was monitoring the ultra-Orthodox community, and he had guys, with strong fists that would coerce people to follow the rules. And he was able to mobilize people to go to demonstrations against Israel on all sorts of things. If it's the Sabbath, if it's modesty, if it's autopsy for dead people, or all sorts of archaeological diggings, all sorts of things. So what made him...
We're talking about the State of Israel, Jerusalem in the 1950s,
yes.
Right? That's
50s and 60s, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So he created his power and his authority mostly by... He was like the chief of staff. Yes, he was a man that was able to mobilize the community and to supervise that everything would follow according to his demands, which were the most extreme.
What was it if he lacked this halachic greatness? Was he just very charismatic? Was he a political leader first and foremost?
I would say yes, that he was a political leader, yeah. Yes. So, whereas most of the leaders of the Haredi community are coming from the rows of the yeshiva.
Yeah, they have to be great rabbis, right?
Yes, or at least Hasidic masters that they inherit their leadership from their parents, or they have to be great rabbis, or both. Amram Bloy was the leader of the military or the police. Yeah. So he got his powers from this situation. And basically it's a self-imposed. He invented this role for himself and was able to convince other people to support him.
Mm-hmm. So basically he recruited young ultra-Orthodox from the other less radical wings of ultra-Orthodoxy?
Yes, he recruited them and he charmed them with his, with his radicalism, with his unwilling to compromise, with his willingness to go and fight. Yeah. Fighting in the concept of ultra-Orthodox or halachic Judaism is something very suspicious because 2,000 years of exile kind of put many restraints on fighting. So when he was able to recreate this movement that would take students from yeshivas and push them to fight, go and fight over their lifestyle, was really appealing in the eyes of many ultra-Orthodox Jews.
Ironically, Zionism did the same, and with efficiency.
Yes, I think you make here an interesting point, yes.
And the interesting thing about Teitelbaum is that his story was really almost the same, but in America. He reached there right after the war, after the Holocaust, and managed to recruit and create this community almost out of nowhere.
Yes, that's true. He made his community from Holocaust survivors, and not necessarily Hungarian Holocaust survivors, but Holocaust survivors that came to the U.S. after the war. They were charmed. Again, I'm using this term. They liked the fact that there is a rabbi that came from Hungary, and he wants to remake the old shtetl, the old European shtetl, but now in New York. And so they sent their children to his institutions that he has created, to educational institutions. And from there, he was able to, with the children's help, he was able to build a Hasidic movement and to pull in their parents. And so, yes, and what made him so successful, again, was that he was radical, that he was recreating this old shtetl, but on the American soil, and that he was an anti-Zionist because he had a different message than all other Orthodox rabbis. Orthodoxy in the United States, generally speaking, is pro-Israel and much pro-Israel, but he was different. And his ability to brand himself differently brought him the success that he gained.
Mm-hmm. What was it about anti-Zionism that was so attractive to American ultra-Orthodox people in the 1940s? Why did anti-Zionism become such an efficient rallying cry?
Well, that is a good question. And I think basically he didn't invent anything new when he published his famous work, V'Yoel Moshe, in 1956. He basically continued this, which was his first book and his major book, which is an anti-Zionist manifesto. And he basically continued the lines of many Hasidic rabbis before the war. So Hasidic Judaism and ultra-Orthodox Judaism was not supportive of Zionism throughout the years. And he just continued this line. And some people that knew of it from the old days, as I said, Holocaust survivors, were attracted to that because this continues something that they've known from before the war. So some people, wars like the Second World War changes them and changes their opinions on things. But some people do not change. Mm-hmm. And this was the case with the Satmar Rebbe and the Satmar followers. They didn't want to change, even though there was a great war and the State of Israel was established and all those things have happened. They didn't want to change their opinions on that question, and so they followed him. He was the only voice.
They thought that Israel was perhaps the biggest, the most flagrant manifestation of this new world that they were trying to preempt.
Yeah, and Yoel Teitelbaum even took it one level above. He basically blamed the Holocaust on Zionism. He said that the Holocaust was God's retribution for secular Judaism and for the Zionist crimes.
Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The two individuals were, as we said, roughly from the same neighborhood in Eastern Europe. They were contemporaries. Did they work together at all? Were they in contact? How did it work?
Yeah, they had an interesting relationship between them. Theoretically speaking, Yoel Teitelbaum was the chief rabbi of the Haida Haredit in Jerusalem, the Haredi community of Jerusalem. And so Amram Bloy was basically his main officer, if you can look at it like that. Yeah. So he was the leader and he was his officer. But sometimes, we look at South America where the officers and the military goes into revolutions. Yeah. So Amram Bloy also had, its own territory. He didn't always accept what Teitelbaum told him to do, and from time to time they even confronted one another on several issues. For example, Yoel Teitelbaum did not disapprove voting for municipal elections, whereas Bloy said, no, you are not allowed to vote at all, no matter what. So this is one way of disagreement, this one point of disagreement. There was also a big clash between them over his marriage, because Amram Bloy was widowed in the 1960s from his first wife, which gave him 10 children. And later on, he wanted to remarry the convert Ruth Ben David. And Yoel Teitelbaum disapproved of this marriage and told him not to marry her. And
because she was a convert?
Yeah, this is a very interesting story, yes, because she was a convert, and it didn't seem like it's suitable for a big rabbi like Amram Bloy to marry a convert.
Right.
So everybody would laugh at them. So the Supreme Court of the Haida Haredit issued a ruling prohibiting Amram Bloy to marry the second wife, and he disobeyed them and married her. Uh-huh. And so it was a big scandal.
Did they fall out following that? Was the relationship marred by this decision?
Yes, it was. And Amram Bloy had to leave Mea Shearim and to move to Bnei Brak for 2 years.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yes,
wow.
So
to go into exile.
Yeah.
Because we're quickly running out of time, I'd like to take you to the more recent period after their death. They both died in the 70s. How did their heritage live on?
Well, how did their heritage live on? It still lives on. After Yoel Teitelbaum died, there was a big crisis inside the Hasidic community in New York, and eventually it split between two movements. So nowadays in New York, there are two Satmar Hasidic movements. And some surveys, interesting surveys that were conducted recently, showing that there is a weakening of the anti-Zionist sentiment among that movement, which is interesting. Also in Jerusalem, after Amram Bloy died, basically it's split between several powers. And this movement, because it split so many times, it basically weakened itself. And now it's much less relevant movement as it was.
But ideologically, are they still as radical as they used to be, or is that waning as well?
Yes. Ideologically, on the surface, on the level of statements, they are just the same. Maybe the listeners can remember a couple of years ago, several Neturei Karta followers went to Tehran to participate in an anti-Israeli conference.
Was that the Holocaust cartoon competition? Right,
Yeah, it was a conference to re-examine the story of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And several Neturei Karta followers went to show they expressed their support, and they still support, and they still go to anti-Israeli demonstrations that are taking place in the United States, and they are still doing the same things. Just 2 years ago, there was a 30,000 demonstration against Israel in New York, participating with Satmar followers. And so it still continues, but I think it is much weakened because Amram Bloy and Yoel Teitelbaum were such great leaders, and after they've died, no one in their magnitude was able to take place.
Very interesting, but I'm afraid this is all we have time for. Professor Moti Inbari, a religion scholar at the University of North Carolina, Pembroke, and the author of the recently published Jewish Radical Ultra-Orthodoxy Confronts Modernity, Zionism, and Women's Equality. Thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much.
And also big thanks to Alex Benish, our sound engineer, and to the Van Leer Institute for their generous support. If you like this podcast and many more where it came from, just go to www.tlv1.fm/podcasts and take your pick.
מחשבות הקיץ כבר נעזו, עד מה הייתי מאוהבת. רחובות הקיץ כבר נעזבו, אורזת וחושבת לי